Screen enclosures, they're just an awesome addition to any Florida home, right? But, building one isn't always as simple as it looks. There's this one huge factor that really changes how they have to be designed and built. And it all boils down to where your property is. So today, we're going to break all of that down for you.
So let me ask you this. Did you know that your screen enclosure could be affected by flood zones? Yeah, it's totally true. Here in Florida, your property's specific flood zone is basically the rule book that dictates exactly how your enclosure has to be built to be safe, secure, and up to code. Okay, so let's dive right in and talk about the reality of flood zones here in Florida. The first thing you've got to understand is that no two properties are ever treated the same.
What's really key here is that FEMA, that's the Federal Emergency Management Agency, they evaluate every single property for its individual flood risk. I mean, this isn't a citywide thing or even a neighborhood thing. Nope. It's specific right down to your address. And that one little designation, it dictates everything. The construction codes you have to follow, the permits you need, and yeah, even how much you're going to pay for insurance.
Which brings us to the real heart of the matter, decoding your flood zone. We're about to break down the main categories so you know exactly what they mean for your project. So FEMA maps break properties down into a few key zones. The four you're going to run into most often are Zone X, which is minimal risk. Then you've got Zones A, E, and A for high risk. And finally, Zone VE for those coastal areas. And believe me, each one comes with its own unique set of rules. All right, first up, let's tackle the easiest one, the most straightforward category you could hope for, Zone X. So if your property is in Zone X, you're in a pretty good spot. These are usually the inland areas, far away from rivers and the coastline, so they have a really minimal chance of flooding. For a screen enclosure project, this basically means that the standard building codes are all you really need to worry about. Pretty simple. Okay, now we're moving into our first high-risk category, and this is Zone AE. This is where the rules start to get a lot more specific, and the engineering becomes absolutely critical. You'll find Zone AE is really common for properties along Florida's tons of rivers and canals. And the most important thing to know about this zone is something called the base flood elevation, or BFE for short. Basically, it's a very specific calculated water level for a major flood, and your enclosure has to be built tough enough to handle it. We're talking special fasteners, even things like flood openings in the foundation, all designed to equalize that water pressure so the whole thing doesn't collapse. So let's really zero in on that term, BFE. Base flood elevation is the absolute cornerstone of building in Zone AE. A good way to think about it is like a predetermined high water mark for your exact property. Every single part of your enclosure, from the foundation up, has to be engineered to handle the forces at that specific water height. There's no getting around it, it's a non-negotiable standard. All right, next up we have Zone A. Now, this one is also considered a high-risk zone, but it's got one huge difference from Zone AE, and it totally changes the game. So with Zone A, we know the flood risk is high, and here's the catch, FEMA hasn't calculated a specific base flood elevation for it. So what does that mean for you? Well, it means that before a single shovel can hit the ground, a licensed engineer has to come in and do an evaluation to figure out what the potential flood impact would be. It adds this whole essential layer of professional assessment before you can even start. And that brings us to the highest risk category of all, the one that demands the absolute toughest engineering and the most careful planning, Zone VE. Zone VE is for those properties right on the coast. We're talking exposure not just to flooding, but to the incredible force of storm waves and hurricanes. And that is exactly why the building codes are so incredibly strict. Building here means specialized, deep foundations and sticking to the absolute highest hurricane and flood-resistant standards, no exceptions.
Okay, so knowing your zone is step one, but what's step two? Well, that's navigating the whole world of permits and compliance to actually get your project off the ground.
See, when you build in what's called a special flood hazard area, and that includes zones A and V, you can't just hand in your standard plans. Oh no, you have to actually prove that your structure is designed to resist two kinds of forces. Hydrostatic forces, which is basically the pressure from standing water, and hydrodynamic forces, that's the impact of moving water. Big difference. So getting that final stamp of approval from the city really comes down to three main things. First, you need detailed site plans. Second, you gotta provide all the in-depth engineering and construction drawings. And third, and this is a big one, all of that paperwork has to include verified proof that your design is 100% compliant with your property's specific FEMA zone rules. Okay, this next part is super important because it's all about setting realistic expectations. let's talk about what a screen enclosure can actually do, and maybe more importantly, what it can't do when it comes to water. So here's the bottom line, the most crucial point. A screen enclosure is designed to do one thing with water: manage the rainwater that comes off its own roof. That's what the gutters and downspouts are for, to collect it and guide it away. But here's what it is not. It is not a flood wall. It absolutely cannot stop ground level water from coming onto your patio. And let me be perfectly clear about this. If you already have problems with bad yard drainage, or if your land slopes the wrong way and sends water running towards your house, or you have those spots that always have standing water after a storm, a screen enclosure will not fix any of that. Those are totally separate grading and landscaping issues that you've got to handle on their own. And listen, even a structure that's built to meet the toughest wind codes is not some kind of watertight bunker. During those crazy tropical downpours we all know and love in Florida, gutters can and absolutely will overflow. You should never, ever expect an enclosure to give you complete protection from water getting in during a hurricane or a major flood. All right, we have covered a lot of ground here, so let's wrap this all up with the key takeaways, the things you really need to remember for a successful, safe, and code-compliant project. So here's your checklist. Number 1, verify your property's exact FEMA flood zone. 2, if you're in Zone AE, make sure the design specifically accounts for that base flood elevation. 3, double check, then triple check that all your permit documents actually prove flood compliance. 4, always remember what it's for. It manages rain, it doesn't stop ground floods. And finally, and this one is so critical, pick an experienced installer who actually understands and builds to these complex codes. You know, knowing all these rules is half the battle, but the other half is all about expert execution. And that's where a really experienced installer makes all the difference in the world. With over 15 years in the business, Screen Factory Florida has helped literally thousands of homeowners navigate these tricky regulations to safely design and install screen enclosures that are fully up to code. So if you want to make sure your project gets done right, you can schedule a free estimate with them. We've put all the details for you right down in the description below.